In this video, we're going to look at revising useful life estimates. So, for example, in the examples we've looked at so far, and the problems we've looked at so far, to find depreciation expense, we asked ourselves, okay, what's the cost of the asset and what's the estimated useful life? Now, what happens if a couple years down the line, management decides that, oh, this asset's actually going to last longer or for a shorter period of time than we thought? What happens then? Well, when that happens, if management actually determines that the asset's going to last longer or shorter than anticipated, a revised estimate of the useful life should be made, and then the depreciation expense to be recorded in remaining periods will be increased or decreased according to those new useful life estimates. So we're going to look at an example here. It says, assume that a company acquires a $10,000 asset estimated to have a 5-year useful life and no residual value. At the beginning of the 4th year, so it's been depreciated for 3 years so far, management decides that the asset will last for 5 more years. Because remember, if it initially had a 5-year useful life and you're 3 years in, at that point you would only have 2 years left over of the useful life, but now 3 years in, they're saying it's going to last for another 5 years. So the revised estimate for useful life in this case is a total of 8 years overall, because initially we thought only 5 years, but by the time we're 3 years in, they thought, okay, it's actually going to not just last us 2 more years, but another 5. So there were 3 extra years tacked on to the useful life estimate here. So the revised estimate of useful life overall is a total of 8 years for the entire life of the asset. But remember, we're 3 years in. So calculate the depreciation expense for the 4th year and for each of the remaining years. So to find this revised depreciation expense, first you start with the book value at the date of the change, And then you make sure to subtract out any salvage value / residual value applicable. So the salvage value at the date of change or on date of change. And you're going to divide that by the remaining useful life on that date that the change is made. So first, we'd want to find that book value at the date of change. So remember, we're 3 years in. So in this case, we'd want to look at how much is left on the books of this asset on this date with their estimates so far. And here for sake of illustration, we're going to assume the use of straight line depreciation here. So under straight line, we would have taken this 10,000, and there's no salvage value or residual value mentioned here. So we would have taken that $10,000 and divided it by the useful life of 5 years initially. So if we take that 10,000 divided by 5, that means we were depreciating $2,000 of this asset each and every year. So that's per year. But remember, on the date of this change, when they decided that they needed to revise these estimates, they had already used the asset for 3 years. So 3 years worth of depreciation had already been recorded. So at that point, $6,000 of depreciation had been recorded on this asset to date. So if the original cost of this asset is $10,000, but $6,000 of it had been depreciated, we can see here that the remaining book value is $4,000 of this asset on the date of this change. So that's the remaining book value. So this remaining book value here of $4,000 is what we're now going to need to find the depreciation expense be recorded for the remaining years. So the remaining book value here we see is $4,000. Then we're going to subtract out any salvage or residual value, which there is none. It's nothing. So they don't expect to have any residual value. And then we're going to divide that number by the remaining useful life. So to find the remaining useful life, we can draw a number line here. So initially they thought the asset was only going to last 5 years. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But up until this point, they've had the asset for 3 full years. So we're at the beginning of year 4. So we've had the asset for a full 3 years. But at this point in year 3, at the end of year 3, beginning of year 4, going into year 4, they decided, okay, it's not going to last us just 2 more years. We think it's going to last us another 5 years. So we extended this number line to year 8. So we have 2 years remaining from the original one, but then we'd add another 3. So 6, 7, 8. Because now they've revised their estimate and say, okay, it's not just going to last us 2 more years, but it's going to last us another 5 years. So let's do it with this one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the revised remaining useful life. So we're going to divide that $4,000 here by remaining useful life of 5 years. So we take our calculator and we do 4,000 divided by 5. That means a revised depreciation each year's 800. So that's a depreciation expense each year for the next 5 years. So we don't go and change the depreciation that was recorded for the first 3 years, but now that we've revised our estimates, at least just the years coming, so for year 4 and up until year 8, or the end of year 8, we will record the revised depreciation of $800 a year instead. So estimates are just those estimates. So if a company comes to the realization that, you know what, our estimate was a little bit off and the asset's going to last us a little bit longer or shorter, they need to go through this process to revise the estimate of depreciation for the years remaining.